Okay, today's Java class will be on loops and variable scope. So loops are used to repeat some instructions multiple times. Let's say you wanted to print the word hot dog 100 times. Would you really want to do this and just use the print statement 100 times? That would be really unrealistic and it would be too repetitive. Instead, you can use a loop to repeat a piece of code without retyping it. We're going to talk about two different types of loops, the for loop and the while loop. So for loops are usually to repeat something a specific number of times. They have four components: the initialization, the condition, the code that you want to repeat, and the variable that's going to change. Now, here's an example. Let's say we're hosting a barbecue for 10 people, and each person wants 2 hot dogs, so we need to cook 20 hot dogs in total. Our initialization is how many hot dogs we start off with, which is 0. Then we have our condition for how long we want to repeat the process of cooking hot dogs. Since we want 20 hot dogs, as long as we have less than 20, we're going to keep cooking more. Once we have 20, we're going to stop the process because we already have enough. So next we have what we want to repeat, which is just cooking the hot dog. And after we cook each hot dog, we need to increment the variable, which is like saying, okay, now I have another hot dog, so it goes from 5 to 6. And that's how you keep track of how many cooked hot dogs you have and when you should stop cooking. So this is the format of a for loop. You have the keyword for, and then in parentheses, you have 3 of the 4 components. You start with the initialization, which is just creating an integer variable, and then you use a semicolon to separate it, and now you have your condition and another semicolon and your increment variable. And then you have curly braces just like in your if statements, and inside these curly braces you have the code that you want to repeat. So this is how the code would look for our hot dog example. We have our Java keyword for, and then in parentheses we create an integer variable called hot dogs, and this has a starting value of 1. Then we have our condition, which means the code will be repeated as long as the variable hot dogs is less than or equal to 20. Then we have our increment, which just says increase the variable hot dogs after every iteration of this code. You might not have seen this format before, but the plus plus just means plus equals 1. So it's like changing the hot dogs variable and increasing it by 1. And finally we have our curly braces, and inside here we just have a print statement saying print cooking hot dog number, and then we use our string concatenation hot dogs, which is just a variable. So in the first iteration of this for loop, the print statement will run cooking hot dog number 1, and then after that it'll be cooking hot dog number 2, and it'll go on until cooking hot dog number 20. So here's another way we could have done that, where instead the print statements count the number of hot dogs left to make. So first we create our hot dogs left variable, and if we start off with 0 cooked hot dogs, then we have 20 that we have left to make. And our condition will be as long as our hot dogs left variable is greater than 0, meaning we have more than 0 hot dogs to make, then we have to keep repeating this code. And then since we're going down, we need to decrement our hot dogs left variable, which just means after every iteration it'll decrease by 1, so 20 and then 19 and then 18. And we have one print statement which says just made a hot dog, and then we have another print statement that says this is the number of hot dogs left to make now. So in our first iteration we have hot dogs left, which is equal to 20, and we'll print just made a hot dog, and hot dogs left minus 1, which will be 19. So the print statement will say 19 hot dogs left to make, and it'll go all the way down to 0, and it'll say just made a hot dog, 0 hot dogs left to make. Now we also have another type of loop called while loops, which are generally less common but still important, and they're really still used a lot. The code will loop until the given condition is false. So as you can see here, you have your keyword while, and inside the parentheses you would put your Boolean condition, and then curly braces with your code inside of it. If the condition is never false, it's an infinite loop that'll run forever until you stop the program or until the program crashes. So in this case, our condition is whether or not 5 is greater than 4. We know 5 is greater than 4, and this is just a fact, and it won't change. So this code will print hello forever, because it's an infinite loop. Now I'll show you how to code the hotdog example using a while loop. So first we have the initialization, which is creating the variable. Notice how we do it outside of the actual loop when we're doing it with a while loop. And it's just created like any other variable we've seen before. And now we have our while loop, and inside of it we put our condition. So as long as the hot dogs is less than or equal to 20, this code will keep running. Then we print the number of hot dogs we are cooking, the number hot dog that we're currently cooking, and then we increment this variable so that it goes up, and this condition will eventually change and be 21, and then the loop will stop running. Here is the for loop code from earlier so you can compare it. For this problem, since we know that we're cooking 20 hot dogs, the preferred way would be to use the for loop, because a for loop is for a set number of iterations. And as you can see, the for loop also has less lines of code. You can see the same things in the while loop as you can in the for loop. We have our initialization here, the condition is here, and here, and our increment here, and then the code is just inside the curly braces for both. Now you might be confused when we want to use the for loop and when we want to use the while loop. It doesn't matter too much as long as you can accomplish the task, but here are some general guidelines. As I've said, the for loop is usually used when you know how many times to repeat something, like 5 or 10 times. And the while loop is used when you don't know how long to repeat something. You're just repeating it until a condition is no longer true. So for example, if you had a number and you wanted to count how many times it takes you to get that number to 1 from dividing it by 2, you would use a while loop. So this would be the code for that. You start with your number, which is 32, and then you create a count variable, which just keeps track of the number of divisions you've done. And then you use a while loop that'll run until the number is less than or equal to 1. In each iteration, you divide the value of num by 2, and then you increment count. Finally, after the while loop is done running, you print the number of divisions. So try to figure out how many divisions this will be. If you know what logarithms are, this code is like finding the log base 2 of the number 32. Okay, so the count variable would be 5 at the end. So it would go 32, it starts off as 32, and then we divide it and we get 16, and now count is equal to 1, and we divide it and we get 8, that's 2, and then we divide it again and we get 4, and that'll be count is equal to 3, and then we divide it again to get 2, and now count is 4, and then finally we divide it one more time to get 1, and count is 5. And now that num is going to be equal to 1, this condition is no longer true because 1 is not greater than 1, so the while loop will stop. Now we're going to talk about variable scope. Variable scope is a part of a program where our variable is accessible, meaning you can use it and modify it in that area. If a variable is declared inside a set of curly braces, like the ones you use in an if statement or a loop, the variable can only be used inside that set of curly braces. So for example, you can see in the image that the variable x is created inside of this main method, this set of curly braces out here. So it can be used anywhere inside this area. Now we have an if statement, and inside of it we create the variable y, and we set it to 50. The variable y can only be used inside this if statement. Now look at this code with two added print statements. Printing inside the if statement will work because y is available inside the if block. But when we go here and we try to print y, we'll get an error because the program doesn't know y exists right here because y is only inside this if block. Okay, so here first x is created and set to equal 10, and then I is created inside the loop, and then it's incremented until I is 10, and then it'll stop. And the output from the loop will go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and all the way till 19. And because I is only available inside the loop, print I right here, because we created I inside the loop, this print I will cause an error in the program. The print X will be fine because it was created outside the loop. But when you're creating your initializing variables in the for loop, the scope would only be inside this loop. And a note is there can only be more than one variable with the same name in a given scope. So this is we have x is equal to 10, and then we have I is equal to 5. But then we create I is equal to 0 in this for loop. This would be illegal because let's say we go into this print statement. This print statement, like inside of this for loop, can access both this I and that I. So it wouldn't know which one to use, so you can't really run this code. This would be fine, even though you still have two I variables. Both of them are restricted to their specific for loop. So the I here can only be used inside here, and the I here can only be used inside here. So this works perfectly fine. And you can create a variable in a broader scope and then modify its value in a smaller scope, like in a loop, and then use the variable outside of the loop again. So that means if we create our variable x here and set it equal to 0, and then in our for loop we change the value of x, this will basically be adding 1, 2, 3, 4, all of that to x. Then when we print it here, whatever was modified, it's still, even though it was inside the for loop, it still changed this original variable. So print x will not be 0, it'll be whatever this was. Alright, so here are some exercises for you to practice what we learned. These are exercises 1 and 2, and this is a third problem, which is a classic problem called the fizz-buzz problem. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can join our Discord and ask there. And that's all for today.